Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm delighted to be with you, Katie. Thank you for inviting me to come on.
So, let me ask you a question. Right wing media like Fox News and the New York Post cannot stop talking about Hunter Biden. And I know you're part of the Oversight Committee, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee that is investigating Hunter Biden. First and foremost, will you help us understand all the controversies that are swirling around the president's son?
Yes, I will do my best. The first thing people should understand is that nothing that is being lobbed at Hunter Biden, either correctly or erroneously, has touched Joe Biden in any way. So people who want to just focus on the president and his administration and the Infrastructure Act and Inflation Reduction Act and healthcare and so on are free to do that. And Hunter Biden's problems are the problems of an adult, emancipated, private citizen. Okay. And I suppose the only ambiguity there is he was a drug addict by his own account. And like most drug addicts, did some awful things and some illegal things, and often invoked his family name in the process, the way a lot of addicts will do in order to try to extract any bit of leverage they can in any situation. But other than that, this has nothing to do with Joe Biden. Having said that, I'm happy to talk about Hunter Biden. And the good thing is that we still live in a free democratic society where we have a legal system that operates. And a U.S. attorney who was appointed by none other than President Donald Trump spent more than 4 years investigating Hunter Biden and has come back with a set of charges related to filing taxes but failing to pay them. And Hunter Biden has paid around $2 million in these back taxes, and then gun charges, essentially lying on a federal form, which I'm very glad we have for people seeking the ability to purchase a firearm, in which he said he was not using drugs at the time, but he was. So he lied in order to get it. Now, what's interesting about this situation is that my beloved GOP colleagues can talk about nothing else other than this, but they've done everything in their power to undercut and defund the IRS. They opposed billions of dollars that Democrats have championed in order to increase capacity at the IRS to go after uncollected tax payments from people who are cheating on their taxes or forgetting about their taxes and so on. And of course, they oppose any gun regulations, including the kind that just caught Hunter Biden. But in any event, in this case, they support the tax charges and they support the gun charges. And if that's what law enforcement has found, then I support them too. And he should have to pay the consequences of the crimes that he has committed. And nobody on the Democratic side is supporting tax evasion or failure to pay taxes. And nobody is supporting people obtaining firearms that they shouldn't lawfully be in possession of. I wish that our GOP colleagues would be consistent in taking those positions. But in any event, with respect to Hunter Biden, they support the enforcement of the law.
Let's talk about this latest development. As you know, last week, two IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, testified publicly for the first time about claims that the Justice Department did not follow normal procedures during its criminal investigation of Hunter Biden's finances. There is a suggestion, Congressman, that they were being stymied, stonewalled, that Hunter Biden was being treated differently than any other American taxpayer who might have broken the law or done things that were illegal. And I'm curious, without getting into too many details, what your reaction is to these two whistleblowers.
Well, after several hours in that hearing, I completely reject that claim. There are 10 million Americans every year who do what Hunter Biden did, which is to file their taxes, but not to make the payment that goes along with it. In less than 1% of the cases are criminal charges brought. Usually, there's either an administrative settlement. The IRS gets in touch with someone and says, hey, you still owe us all this money. Where's the money? And then it's worked out. Or maybe there's a civil case, but in very few cases, a tiny handful of cases, are criminal charges brought. So my sense of it, after hearing all the testimony, was if anything, he was treated more severely with 4 years and thousands of investigative agent man hours going into the investigation. He was not let off easily at all. And on the contrary, you might say quite the reverse. But in any event, this is where the justice system has brought us to. These two people, I'm not quite sure they're whistleblowers exactly. They are investigators who disagreed with the ultimate charges, which the U.S. attorney brought. And again, this was Donald Trump's appointed U.S. attorney, and he was appointed under Attorney General William Barr. So he's a Republican U.S. attorney who came from a Republican administration. They disagreed with it. And, as a former state assistant attorney general myself, and as any of the prosecutors on our panel will tell you, or any prosecutor will tell you, prosecutors and investigators usually disagree. The investigators want to bring all of the charges because they're just looking at the evidence against the person, but it's the job of the prosecutor, who actually has to go to court, appear before the judge, argue against the defense counsel, to understand, well, what is the defense and what are the weaknesses in our case? And so prosecutors inevitably end up bringing fewer charges than the prosecutors would like. So this, to me, was just an old-fashioned, run-of-the-mill dispute between some investigators and some prosecutors. In fact, one of the so-called whistleblowers who appeared testified that the criminal tax division, which which his team would report to, overruled their suggestions, he said, in more than 80% of the cases that they would bring. In other words, the investigators want to throw the kitchen sink at the defendant. And when the prosecutors are looking at bringing the case, they're far more fine-tuned in what they do. I mean, a good example of that is if you check out the prosecution of Donald Trump for the pilfered top secret and confidential government documents he took with him. They're only charging him for the documents that he refused to return after there was a grand jury subpoena and after there was a search. Now, they could have charged him for all of the documents he took with him on the day he left the White House. But they didn't do that. They said, all right, even though it was against the law, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt for one bite at the apple, 2 bites of the apple. But by the time you get to the third bite of the apple, it was very clear he was given every possible opportunity to return them. And they said, we'll charge him for those documents and none other. It's still dozens of charges, but I can imagine investigators being very frustrated, saying, why are the prosecutors letting him off on all of these other criminal charges? But it's a very common thing. I mean, in fact, when you look at the January 6th committee, we recommended a whole series of charges to the Department of Justice against Donald Trump for a conspiracy to interfere with and obstruct a federal proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the American people of an honest election. But we also had, and apparently those are part of what the special counsel Jack Smith is looking at right now. And again, this is just what's reported, but it is also being reported that not on there is a charge that we'd recommended for aiding and abetting or giving aid and comfort to an insurrection. Now, we think there's clear and overwhelming evidence for that, but that statute has not been charged frequently in American history. We would say because no other U.S. president has done anything remotely like what Donald Trump did on January 6th. But we were, I think a little bit concerned or frustrated to hear that might not be in the final table of charges brought against Donald Trump. But there's just honest disagreement about that. That doesn't make us whistleblowers. It just makes us people who have a different point of view.
Let's talk about sort of the suggestions of some kind of bribery uh, that your counterpart, James Comer, the head of the subcommittee, is really perpetuating, along with Charles Grassley. What do you think their claims are, and why do you think they're specious?
Well, it's not that I think they're specious. They've been rejected multiple times. These are the old Giuliani charges. You remember when Giuliani was gallivanting around Ukraine and Europe and then Washington and Capitol Hill? It was all with the charge that they knew from a Ukrainian oligarch that there had been a $5 million bribe given to Joe Biden. And this is what's taken as the gospel truth on Fox News today. Well, as recently as last week, Lev Parnas, who was Rudy Giuliani's right-hand man in that crusade to try to set Joe Biden up, has said there is nothing there. It's all fabricated. It's all invented. They went all over the world looking for something against Joe Biden, and there's no concrete evidence of it at all. There's nothing there. He, who is, again, Giuliani's right-hand man, calls on Chairman Comer to call off the wild goose chase. That's a quote, the wild goose chase, he called it. So he said he'd be happy to come and testify about how there's nothing there. And he said this is dividing America for no reason. It's polarizing the country, and there's no evidence of it. But you can go even further than that, because when they first raised all of those charges, William Barr, who of course was Donald Trump's attorney general, named for a prosecutorial investigative team in the Eastern District of the Western District of Pennsylvania to go after these allegations. And this team came back. Again, this is the U.S. attorney appointed by the Trump administration, came back and said there's no grounds to go from this initial assessment of this one tip, which they said was specious and empty. There was nothing behind it sufficient to move to a full-blown or even a preliminary investigation. Again, that's during the Trump DOJ administration. And so basically, it's the same old recycled allegations that have gone nowhere. There's nothing there. They don't have anything. And Parnas is saying, like, enough of this already. I'll come forward and I'll testify. And he was the guy with Rudy Giuliani who was going all over the world to look for some clue that would be real evidence. So I'm afraid there's just nothing there.
Why do you think Fox News is covering this night after night after night?
Well, some people would say it's just the traditional attempt to nail your political opponents, but I think it's much more specific than that. You know, Donald Trump, who is the front runner for the GOP nomination in 2024, may be the most significantly damaged and impaired presidential candidate in American history. He's been impeached twice. The second time, impeached and voted in robust bicameral bipartisan majorities to have incited a violent insurrection against the Union. He's been declared and found by a civil court to be a sexual abuser, a defamer of women. He is facing a whole panoply of charges all over the country. He's basically a one-man crime wave. He exercises some kind of spellbinding control over a small minority of the American people, but at least a narrow majority of the GOP. And so they're in a terrible situation politically. So they're not going to be able to expand their base. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 7 million votes in 2020. It was not a close election. Biden beat Trump by the same electoral college margin that Trump beat Hillary Clinton by, and Trump declared that to be a landslide. So he was defeated by a landslide in the electoral college by more than 7 million votes. And what's the difference in the electorate between 2020 and 2024? Well, there will be somewhere around 20 or 25 million new, overwhelmingly young voters who are totally anti-Trump, and they reject the racism and the homophobia and the misogyny and the authoritarianism and the divisiveness and the polarization, and they're moving in another direction. So the Republicans are looking at an historic repudiation and wipeout in the 2024 election. So what is their political imperative? Well, whatever people think about Donald Trump, they've got to get people to think about Joe Biden. So if Donald Trump is a incorrigibly corrupt and self-interested politician, they've got to say that totally implausibly about Joe Biden, who has devoted his whole life to real public service, whose administration has just added more than 13 million new jobs in America, who's investing more than $1 trillion in the infrastructure of the country, rail and cybersecurity and the airports and the ports and so on. Joe Biden is a man of the people in the sense that he believes that the government has got to be an instrument for the common good and the well-being of everybody, whereas Donald Trump views government as a money-making operation for himself and his family. So they've got to turn the tables on Joe Biden to claim that Biden is just as corrupt as Donald Trump. They don't have a program, they don't have a platform, but at least they can say the other guy is just as bad as the person who's been impeached twice, who has disgraced America time and time again in the eyes of the world. And I mean, it's a very sinister, cynical program, but that is what they are doing. Whatever people think about Donald Trump, they're going to try to get the public to think about Joe Biden.
I hate to bring up Hunter Biden's laptop, but I think that's another thing, Congressman, people are confused about. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene did a bizarre thing with Hunter Biden's laptop. You were there. Can you talk about that and how the role his laptop is playing in all this?
Sure. Well, first, I think during one of his drug-induced periods, he dropped off his laptop someplace and then failed to pick it up in time, and then it fell into, the hands of Joe Biden's political enemies, the way these things happen. So the Democrats on the Oversight Committee, we've not seen the hard drive for the Hunter Biden laptop, which is what the Republicans claim to have. They refuse to give it to us, which is a total violation of the traditions and rules of the House Oversight Committee. The person who originally injected the laptop into popular culture discourse is now saying he has no idea what is real on there and what has been added and what is corrupted the original hard drive. So in any event, our colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene does something utterly outrageous and unprecedented, which is she projects into the public theater of people watching the Oversight Committee pornographic pictures, people literally engaging in sex acts. And I take it as attributing it to the hard drive from Hunter Biden's laptop. Well, there's certain things we can notice about this. Number one, it's utterly unprecedented for somebody to show nude pictures of people engaged in pornographic acts in Congress. If that were in a book, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz would want to ban it. But instead, they projected it, which shows you the seriousness of their convictions. The second thing is it was completely irrelevant because the purpose of the hearing was to allege and to demonstrate, which they did not do, that somehow there was political interference brought to bear to limit the charges against Hunter Biden. Well, how does that claim? Let's say they had real evidence of that there was some kind of political interference, which there was not. I mean, there was nothing about Joe Biden, nothing about anybody in the Biden family contacting the prosecutors, nothing about anybody in the Biden administration or the Biden Department of Justice contacting the prosecutors, nothing. But how could the showing of pornography go to that question? It's just irrelevant. And so it was completely gratuitous. It was sensationalistic. It was voyeuristic. And it demonstrates a desperate effort to raise money online and to be famous and to be in the news, or just to try and humiliate people on the other side, which is a basically fascistic form of politics, where instead of talking about issues and programs and what we want government to do for the people, you just try to humiliate and ridicule your opponents. And that's basically a fascistic form of politics. So I think that's outrageous. And I'm sending a letter to Chairman Comer asking him to renounce this as a tactic and employ. Look, if that does not violate the rules of decorum of the United States House of Representatives, then we don't have any rules of decorum in the U.S. House of Representatives. And maybe that's what they're saying, that they've dragged us so far into the mud, there are no rules left.
And I know that House Democrats are preparing to file a censure resolution against her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Chairman Comer saw what was happening and he let it happen. So I think all of it is way beneath the most minimal levels of dignity and decorum that we should have in a public setting. Now, again, if it were relevant somehow, well, then it should go through the committee, and the committee should discuss, doing it and in what context and so on. But in the middle of the day, to spring pornographic photos that are totally irrelevant to the defined object of the proceeding is just an outrage and a scandal. And I think it also demonstrates a kind of desperation. They don't have anything there. As we've been saying, Katie, there is nothing to their investigation. And they think that just by throwing more spaghetti and lasagna and ravioli on the wall, people will think, well, there's got to be something there. There's just nothing there. And, you can find a lot of bad things that Hunter Biden did in the frenzy and blur of drug addiction. You can't find anything on Joe Biden.
Let me ask you about this suggestion that the laptop was somehow kept secretive and it would have had an impact on the 2020 election. Barry Weiss, you might know Barry, she was a columnist for the New York Times. She now has her own media company. She wrote in a recent newsletter that Laura Demlow, the current chief of the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, has stated that the FBI had authenticated the laptop as Hunter Biden's as early as December of 2019. I think what that suggests is somehow there was a cover-up or they didn't make this available. So I know you're grimacing at but this is sort of what their line is. And I'm curious, I want you to give me your point of view on that.
Hunter Biden had a laptop. I think everybody in America, or most adults have a laptop. So she's saying that they'd authenticated that was his laptop. But what are they asserting is in the laptop other than pornography that has anything to do with President Biden and the Biden administration? Nothing.
I guess they're saying nobody really knows. And if they had access to it, they could have completely examined what was on that laptop.
We the Democrats don't have the laptop. Okay.
Right.
And so the Republicans have it. So they've milked whatever they found on the laptop or whatever has been projected onto the laptop or inserted into the laptop. They've milked it for everything it's worth. And there's still nothing linking any President Biden to any criminal activity. Nothing at all. And the Trump appointed U.S. attorney, Gates, did not find anything.
How much a liability do you believe Congressman Hunter Biden is for the Biden campaign as he seeks reelection in 2024?
You know, look, the American people have a lot of common sense, even with all of the propaganda and disinformation and big lies that Donald Trump specializes in and his team promotes. I mean, they have falsely claimed that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, and of course, everything flows out of that big lie. All of these other lies and all of the propaganda and disinformation. I think that people are able to hold two thoughts in their head at once. One is that Joe Biden has been an excellent president. He's a man with great sense of purpose and integrity in public life. And he had a son, has a son who had a very serious drug problem after his brother died, and went on just crazy drug binges. And he has written about it and he's told about it, and he used prostitutes. And, and I think that was, what Marjorie Taylor Greene was getting at, that, these are prostitutes and he's having sex with prostitutes and so on. Again, what does it have to do with the real problems facing the country? And they simply have not laid a glove on Joe Biden. So that's the critical thing for people to understand.
How can Democrats more successfully refute some of these allegations that are being circulated in right-wing media?
Well, I think that the excellent Democrats on the House Oversight Committee are demolishing these allegations on a daily basis. And there's great frustration on the Republican side that nothing they've said is broken through. Now, it's true that they are repeating their deceptions and their propaganda on Fox News for that audience of people who are, already willing to believe anything that Donald Trump tells them. But it has remained quarantined and cabined there. And we are just trying to get the truth out to the whole country, to anybody who's willing to hear it, and the facts. And, it's not that we're claiming that Hunter Biden is an Eagle Scout or anything like that. We're saying understand him for who he is and what he did, but understand it's got nothing to do with President Biden and the Biden administration and the successes they've been having.
You say that Republicans are frustrated. Are you frustrated that these claims are being circulated quite widely among American voters?
I mean, I'm frustrated because we have such serious problems facing the country, Katie. I mean, it's been 110 or 115 degrees for the last 3 or 4 weeks in Arizona. The heat is just sweltering and brutal throughout Texas and throughout the South. We had 9 inches of pounding rain in Vermont, record drought, record ocean rise taking place. Climate change is bearing down on us, and all they can talk about is some dirty pictures on Hunter Biden's laptop computer. So, yeah, I think it's a massive distraction from the real things that face us as a country. I mean, we're talking about the future of our kids and our grandchildren, and what are we doing about it? And they're in absolute denial about climate change, the same way, Donald Trump was in denial about COVID-19 and told everybody, oh, it's going to just disappear by Easter, or everybody take hydroxychloroquine, or everybody just inject yourself with bleach. I mean, there's a kind of deranged, irrational thinking that is permeating right-wing politics today. And that's a great danger for us. And the Republican Party was Lincoln's party. That was a pro-freedom, anti-slavery, pro-reason, pro-immigration, anti-know-nothing party. And it has been reduced to a cult of authoritarian personality, which thrives on lies and conspiracy theories and deception. So, yeah, I'm concerned about that. But I'm convinced that the vast majority of the American people are able to distinguish between fact and fiction, between what's true and what is deranged conspiracy theory. Our framers were Enlightenment thinkers who wanted people to think critically, rationally for themselves, and not to swallow the kind of nonsense that is being promoted to the public.
Congressman Jamie Raskin. Congressman, thank you. By the way, there's breaking news on the New York Times website. A global warming tipping point is closer than once thought. Warming could push the Atlantic past a tipping point this century. So you're talking about global warming. There's another example. The system of ocean currents that regulates climate for a swath of the planet could collapse sooner than expected, a new analysis found.
Yeah. So look, we've got to defend our democracy with everything we've got. And then once we've been able to get through the crisis of authoritarianism and conspiracy theory in America, we need to lead the world in a massive effort to save our species by acting on climate change. But the autocrats in Moscow are not going to do it. The kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago are not going to do it. The theocrats across America who are attacking women's rights are not going to do it. It is only the Democrats, the small d Democrats who believe in democracy, who are going to take sufficient action in order to save our species on Earth.
I have to ask you just one quick follow-up, Congressman, and then we'll be done. But you claim that you believe that Joe Biden has been an excellent president. You cite his job creation, you cite the infrastructure bill. Why do you think his approval rating is lingering at 40%?
Well, a lot of it is the kind of propaganda and disinformation we're talking about. I think, look, Katie, we live in a society that is somewhat obsessed with youth and beauty. And Joe Biden is a perfectly good-looking guy, but now everybody is saying that he's too old, and he moves too slowly, and so on, instead of looking at his administration and what the policies and the products of his administration are. So I think people just need to reflect carefully about that. And obviously, Biden and Trump are just a few years apart from each other anyway. I think Biden has said in a compelling way, at least to me, that the advantage of being older is the wisdom that you have. He's able to see certain patterns over history. He's been able to exercise a lot of wisdom while in office. So I don't hold it against him, but I know, people say to me all the time, like, oh, I see him on TV and he's moving so slowly. He really needs to do yoga, or he needs to do aerobics or something. And obviously doesn't have a lot of time for that kind of stuff. But I just think we have to understand politics is about something much bigger than that. You know what I mean? Like, the question isn't like, would you go out with Joe Biden? He's married anyway. He's got a brilliant, lovely wife. I mean, the question is, do you like the kind of public policies he's been able to promote through an administration he put together?
All right. Thank you so much. I know you got to go. You've been so generous with your time. It's great to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman.
It's great to see you, Katie. Thank you for having me.